Hi, I'm Emma. Welcome to Hidden Finance. If you're earning more than ever but still feel like you're standing still, you're not alone. Here, we uncover the quiet systems shaping your money, income traps, rising costs, lifestyle inflation, and the hidden psychology that keeps even high earners feeling stuck. No hype, no shortcuts, just clear thinking and practical strategies that actually move the needle. If you're ready to stop reacting to money and start directing it, this is where we begin. At 5:30 on a Friday evening, the city moves with a strange kind of exhaustion. Engines hum in slow traffic, train doors close with mechanical indifference, screens glow softly in tired hands. Everyone is going somewhere, yet no one seems particularly alive in the process. Among them sits a familiar figure, not a specific person, but a type of person. The kind who learned early that adulthood meant stability, a steady job, a reliable paycheck, a respectable routine. Call this character the responsible one. The responsible one wakes up early enough to appear disciplined, drinks coffee strong enough to silence fatigue, and dresses carefully enough to look like someone whose life is under control. On paper, everything works. A salary that sounds reasonable, benefits that look professional, a calendar that proves productivity. Yet something strange happens every Friday evening. The brain stops cooperating. Cooking dinner feels like climbing a mountain. A small decision suddenly feels exhausting. So a phone comes out, and with 2 taps, dinner arrives from somewhere else. $45 for Thai food, or pizza, or something comforting enough to silence the week. A quiet voice whispers, "I earned this." And in a way, that voice isn't wrong. After all, 45 hours of meetings, emails, deadlines, and small frustrations should earn something, a reward, a moment of relief. But beneath that small moment of comfort hides a far less comforting truth. The price of that meal was never $45, because the meal is only the visible cost. Hidden underneath are quieter expenses that rarely appear on a receipt. The gas burn driving home through traffic, the clothes bought to look professional enough for the office, the coffee purchased simply to survive the afternoon meeting that should have been an email. And then there is the most invisible cost of all, the money spent not for survival, but for recovery. The drink that softens the edges of a stressful week, the streaming show watched without interest simply to turn the mind off, the impulsive purchase that promises a brief feeling of control. Little by little, something unsettling begins to appear. Work does not only produce income, it also produces expenses that exist solely because the work exists. The commute, the convenience food, the exhaustion spending. The responsible one believes they are selling time for $30 an hour. But the deeper the numbers are examined, the stranger the equation becomes. Because when the hidden costs are finally counted, the paycheck begins to shrink in a way few people ever calculate. The paycheck remains the same, but the life surrounding it quietly drains the value away. And somewhere in that quiet subtraction lies an uncomfortable question most people never pause long enough to ask. If the job pays $30 an hour, why does life still feel like it barely pays at all? Or even more unsettling, what if the real number is far smaller than anyone ever imagined? Most people measure their worth the way companies measure revenue. They look at the top line, the annual salary. $65,000 a year sounds respectable, responsible, safe. Divided neatly across working hours, it becomes roughly $30 an hour, a number clean enough to make adulthood feel mathematically stable. But in the world of business, there is a rule that experienced entrepreneurs understand instinctively. Revenue means nothing without expenses. A bakery can sell $1 million worth of bread each year, but if flour, rent, and electricity also cost $1 million, the bakery earns exactly zero. Yet strangely, when it comes to human labor, the same logic is almost never applied. The responsible one sees income, but rarely examines the cost of producing that income. Imagine for a moment a quiet audit, not of a company, but of a life. Start with the obvious deduction: taxes. Before the salary even arrives, a portion disappears. Federal, state, social contributions, all quietly reducing that comfortable $30 an hour into something closer to $24. Predictable, expected. But the real revelations arrive next. The costs that exist purely because employment exists. The commute alone consumes thousands each year. Gas, maintenance, insurance, or train passes and parking tickets. A car that might never have been necessary in another version of life. Then appearance, professional clothing, shoes that match office expectations, haircuts timed around meetings, dry cleaning for shirts that exist solely to signal competence. And then comes the most subtle category, the convenience tax. Lunch purchased because mornings are rushed, coffee bought because exhaustion demands fuel, services hired because time at home disappears. These are not luxuries. They are survival tools inside a schedule designed for productivity rather than balance. But the final category reveals the deepest truth: the spending that exists to heal the psychological cost of the job itself. The weekend bar tab, the sudden vacation booked after months of pressure, the late-night online purchases promising a moment of emotional reward. None of these appear on the job description, yet they exist because of it. When all these numbers are quietly assembled, something unsettling emerges. The $65,000 salary begins to look smaller, much smaller. $30 an hour becomes $24. $24 becomes $18. $18 becomes something closer to $12. And then a final realization arrives, the one almost no one includes in the equation: time. Because the job does not only consume 40 hours each week, it consumes the preparation, the commute, the mental residue carried home after work. Slowly, almost invisibly, 40 hours becomes 55, sometimes 60. And when the final equation appears, the number staring back can feel almost surreal. A career that promised $30 an hour, quietly delivering something closer to 8 or 10. Or less, which leads to the uncomfortable realization that few people are ever taught to calculate. What if the greatest financial misunderstanding of modern life is not about investing, but about the true price of the work itself?
Once the real number appears, something subtle begins to change. A quiet discomfort. Not loud enough to start a rebellion, not dramatic enough to trigger an immediate life overhaul. Just a quiet shift in perspective. Because the moment someone realizes their real wage might be $10 an hour instead of $30, the world begins to look different. A price tag no longer shows money, it shows time. A pair of shoes priced at $100 suddenly carries a different meaning. Not $100, 10 hours. 10 hours of alarms ringing too early. 10 hours of traffic lights and passive-aggressive emails. 10 hours of nodding politely in meetings that drift in circles. And suddenly, a strange thought appears. Was that object really worth a full workday of life? Most of the time, the answer becomes painfully obvious. But the system surrounding modern work is not built to encourage this kind of thinking. In fact, it quietly encourages the opposite. Because the moment income rises, new expenses tend to appear with perfect timing. A promotion arrives with a congratulatory email, $10,000 more each year, a reason to celebrate. Yet promotions often carry invisible upgrades that quietly eat the raise alive. Longer hours, more stress, takeout dinners because evenings disappear into work calls, clothes that must now look more executive, a larger apartment closer to downtown, sometimes even a second car. From the outside, life appears to be improving. The salary number rises, the LinkedIn title grows more impressive. But beneath the surface, the real hourly wage can quietly shrink. More money flows through the bank account, while less freedom remains in the calendar. This phenomenon has a quiet name: golden handcuffs. Comfortable enough to feel like success, expensive enough to prevent escape. And while attention focuses on bigger paychecks, something even more dangerous slips by unnoticed: opportunity cost. Because every dollar spent on convenience, stress relief, or lifestyle upgrades is not just money disappearing today, it is money that never gets the chance to grow tomorrow.
$5 for coffee every weekday might feel insignificant, just a small reward for surviving the morning. But across 30 years, invested modestly, that daily ritual can quietly grow into something astonishing, nearly $200,000, which means the coffee was never just coffee. It was a small sip of something much larger. Freedom postponed, retirement delayed, time slowly traded away without anyone noticing the exchange. And perhaps the most unsettling realization of all begins to surface. The system does not require anyone to be poor. It only requires people to be too tired to do the math, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. If exhaustion is part of the design, what happens the moment someone finally slows down long enough to question the equation? There is usually a moment when the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Not a dramatic breakdown, more like a quiet realization. It might happen on a Sunday afternoon, when the mind is finally clear enough to think without deadlines pressing from every direction. The responsible one sits down with a notebook. Nothing complicated, just a few honest numbers. Commute costs, monthly lunches, clothing expenses, taxes, weekend spending that exists purely to recover from the week. Then the second column appears. Time. The hour spent getting ready in the morning, the commute that steals 2 hours a day, the lunch break that cannot truly be used for rest, the mental residue carried home each evening. Suddenly, the 40-hour work week begins to look like something else entirely. 55 hours, sometimes 60. Hours that orbit the job even when the clock says work is finished. Then comes the final calculation. Net income divided by total hours committed to the job. The number appears, quietly, sometimes shocking, sometimes simply disappointing, but always clarifying. Because that number becomes a translator for the rest of life. A $100 purchase no longer feels abstract. It becomes 10 hours, or 12, or 15. Time that must be surrendered before the object can exist. And something interesting begins to happen when purchases are measured in hours instead of dollars. Impulse weakens, desire slows down, consumerism loses its hypnotic rhythm, because objects rarely look as attractive when their true price is measured in pieces of life. This is not about guilt, it is about awareness. Once the equation becomes visible, behavior starts to shift almost automatically. Lunch prepared on Sunday quietly eliminates dozens of convenience purchases. Working from home even one extra day each week returns entire hours back to life. Small decisions begin creating something subtle but powerful: margin. The distance between income and expenses, the breathing room between time spent working and time spent living. And within that margin lies something that rarely appears on a paycheck: autonomy. Because freedom is rarely created through sudden dramatic changes. It grows slowly, in the small gaps where money is no longer leaking away and time is no longer sold at a discount. Yet one final question remains. If life can be optimized this way, why do so few people ever attempt the calculation at all? There is a quiet misconception about financial freedom. Most people imagine it arriving suddenly: a lottery win, a massive salary jump, a lucky investment that multiplies overnight. But freedom rarely arrives like a lightning strike. More often, it begins with something far less dramatic: a calculation. The kind that happens on a quiet Sunday morning when the mind is clear enough to look at life without the noise of deadlines or notifications. The responsible one sits down again. The same notebook, the same numbers. But this time, something different appears in the margins of the page: possibility. Because once the real hourly wage is visible, life stops feeling like a fixed system. It becomes a design problem, a series of small levers waiting to be adjusted. The commute that steals 2 hours each day suddenly looks negotiable. Working from home once or twice a week quietly returns hundreds of hours each year. Lunch prepared on Sunday eliminates dozens of rushed purchases during the week. Ignoring the silent competition of office appearance removes entire categories of spending that once felt necessary. Each small decision looks insignificant in isolation, but together they create something powerful: Space. A widening gap between money earned and money spent. A widening gap between time sold and time lived. And in that gap, something unexpected begins to grow. Breathing room. The kind that allows curiosity to return. The kind that makes learning new skills possible again. The kind that allows someone to imagine alternative paths that once seemed unrealistic. Because the real transformation is not purely financial, it is psychological. Once labor is treated like a business, priorities begin to shift. A smart business owner does not obsess only over increasing revenue. They focus on margin, efficiency, sustainability. The same principle quietly applies to a life. A person earning $100,000 a year while spending $95,000 and working 80 hours each week is not running a successful operation. From a business perspective, that model is fragile. One unexpected disruption and everything collapses. But someone earning $50,000 while spending $20,000 and working 30 hours a week, that is a different kind of enterprise. Quietly profitable, resilient, flexible. The real wealth lies not in the number printed on the paycheck, but in the distance between obligations and freedom. And that distance is built through awareness, through the willingness to question expenses that once felt normal, through the discipline to measure purchases not in dollars, but in hours of life. Because time is the only currency that never replenishes. Money can return, opportunities can reappear, but an hour traded away is gone forever. In the end, the quietest revolution begins with a simple shift in perspective. The wealthy often buy time. The exhausted unknowingly sell it at a discount. The moment someone begins protecting their hours as carefully as their income, the entire equation changes. Work becomes a tool instead of a trap. Spending becomes intentional instead of automatic. And slowly, almost invisibly, the hamster wheel begins to slow. Not because the system disappeared, but because someone finally understood how the math worked. And once the math is understood, life stops being something that simply happens. It becomes something that can be designed, 1 hour at a time.